I am Jenith, 32 years old, an architect working for an interior design firm in Oslo, Norway. My life once revolved around meticulous drawings, the quiet hum of drafting tables, and houses that rose from ideas sketched in my mind. I thought I had everything under control: the creativity, the career, and a marriage I believed would last forever. I married Elias, 35, a marine engineer, 7 years ago. We met at a renewable energy conference in Bergen. He spoke passionately about ships navigating the turbulent North Sea, while I daydreamed about eco-friendly homes that could float light and airy in the Norwegian landscape. His smile, carefree yet reassuring, felt like a harbor after months of aimless wandering, and I convinced myself that I had finally found safe refuge. For years, I clung to that idea, imagining a life where the designs I drafted and the life I built with him intertwined seamlessly. Yet the truth was subtler, hidden in the quiet spaces between conversations, the small lies tucked behind smiles, and the distant look in his eyes when I least expected it. The facade of safety I had embraced was fragile, like the thin glass walls of a model home. I was anchored in what I thought was certainty, but slowly, imperceptibly, the tides of reality began to shift beneath my feet, revealing that the harbor I had trusted might have been nothing more than an illusion. If you're still listening, we want to sincerely thank you for spending your time with us. Truly means a lot. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments and let's see how far this message has reached. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I highly recommend doing it now so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. These aren't just ordinary stories. They're filled with meaningful life lessons that can inspire, teach, and stay with you long after the video ends. Hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. The fateful trip began on a chilly autumn day, the sky over Oslo a heavy sheet of gray clouds that promised rain, or perhaps just a lingering gloom that matched my unease. Elias, I, and his two sisters, Freya and Liv, had planned a weekend getaway to a small town in central Norway for a university friend's wedding. Freya, 37, worked in communications at an advertising firm in Stockholm. Liv, 29, was a free-spirited artist living in Copenhagen. I had been looking forward to this trip for weeks, imagining a short, carefree escape. The four of us crammed into Elias's old Volvo, sharing gas, swapping stories, and laughing as the Norwegian countryside rolled past our windows. Yet, from the very beginning, I sensed something was off. Freya and Liv kept exchanging glances in the rearview mirror, leaning toward each other to whisper words I couldn't quite catch. Every so often, one would stifle a laugh, and I felt a pang of exclusion. When I asked Elias what was going on, he simply smiled, running his fingers through my hair, and said, "Just sister stuff, don't worry about it." I wanted to trust him, to shrug off the uneasy knot forming in my stomach, but instinct whispered that something wasn't right. We stopped at a tiny gas station just outside Geilo, a mountain town more than 200 kilometers from Oslo. I stepped out of the Volvo, rubbing my hands together against the cold, and went inside for a cup of hot coffee and a quick restroom break. The air inside smelled faintly of diesel and baked goods, a comforting contrast to the biting wind outside. I lingered longer than necessary, savoring the warmth and hoping that my premonitions were nothing but paranoia. When I finally returned, the car was already running. Elias was behind the wheel, his face illuminated by the dull glow of the dashboard, Freya and Liv laughing in the back seat. "Get in, Jenith," I whispered to myself, trying to summon courage. But as I reached for the door, Elias looked at me through the glass, a strange smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Jenith," he said softly, almost cheerfully, "we've talked and we think you need to learn a bit of independence." My hands froze on the door handle. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice tighter than I intended. Freya leaned forward, her expression laced with mockery. "You're always clinging to Elias like a shadow. We thought this would be a good opportunity for you to manage on your own." Liv chimed in, her tone bright and teasing. "A little adventure, Jenith. Relax." I swallowed hard, my pulse quickening. I tried to keep my voice calm, but the words felt hollow even to me. "This isn't funny, Elias. Take me home. He laughed, a sound that made my stomach twist, as though he were amused by some private joke I wasn't in on. Not funny, he said. It's a prank. You're too serious, Jenith. Go on, figure it out for yourself. Before I could respond, he pressed the accelerator. The Volvo slid forward slowly, leaving me standing there, frozen on the cold asphalt, clutching my wallet, my phone, and a heart that felt as if it were shattering into pieces. The wind whipped around me, tugging at my coat and tossing strands of hair across my face. I stared after the car, the taillights fading into the gray horizon, disbelief and panic warring within me. The world seemed to narrow to that empty stretch of parking lot, the hum of distant traffic a cruel reminder that I was utterly alone. My breath came in shallow, sharp bursts, and I pressed my hands against my chest, trying to keep from trembling. Memories of our years together, the gentle way he used to brush hair from my forehead, the quiet evenings in our apartment filled with sketches and laughter, collided violently with the reality before me. The man I had trusted, the partner I had loved, had left me stranded like a child learning to walk on my own. I took a tentative step forward, then another, gripping my coat tighter as the chill seeped into my bones. Around me, the autumn landscape was beautiful in its indifference. Golden leaves clung stubbornly to black-barked trees, and mist curled around the peaks of distant mountains. The serenity of the scene mocked my turmoil. I realized, bitterly, that life could be cruel in subtle ways, like a design that seemed flawless on paper but collapsed under the slightest pressure. Fear gave way to determination. I would not let this humiliation break me completely. I examined my surroundings carefully, a narrow road stretching toward Galo, the faint lights of a gas station behind me, and the forest pressing in like silent witnesses. My mind raced through options. Hitchhiking, calling a taxi, finding a local bus, but each possibility carried the gnawing anxiety of vulnerability. Every step I took away from the parking lot felt like walking further into the unknown, a test of courage I hadn't asked for but could not escape. As I moved, I felt a strange clarity settle over me, tempered by anger and disbelief. The prank, the laughter, the deliberate isolation, it was all a lesson I hadn't agreed to, but one I would have to endure. And in that cold, lonely moment, standing in the shadow of the mountains with only the crunch of leaves beneath my boots, I understood that my life, my choices, and my sense of self could no longer depend entirely on anyone else. I inhaled deeply, drawing in the crisp, pine-scented air, and stepped onto the road. Each footfall was a quiet declaration. I would navigate this, survive this, and find my way back, not just to Oslo but to myself. The autumn wind cut through my thin coat, tugging at the sleeves and sending chills crawling up my spine. The sharp scent of approaching snow hung in the air, crisp and biting, and I shivered as I pressed my phone against my ear, dialing Elias's number with a trembling hand. Straight to voicemail. I tried Freya and Liv next, but silence met me again. Then it hit me. Liv had blocked my number months ago after a minor argument. My chest tightened, and I realized the depth of what had just happened. This was no mere prank. It was a slap to my self-esteem, a declaration that, in their eyes, I was nothing. I turned back toward the gas station, seeking some anchor of guidance, and asked the attendant how to get back to Oslo. He shook his head. No buses run directly from here. There's a station in Galo about 30 kilometers that way. 30 kilometers. My stomach sank, but I nodded, forcing myself to think clearly. I called a taxi, shelling out nearly 800 kroner, a sum I would have preferred to avoid, but I had no other choice. There was no one else to rely on. Sitting in the cramped, rattling bus seat hours later, my coat wrapped tightly around me, I gazed out at the darkened mountains rolling past the window. Shadows draped the peaks like blankets, and the dim light from small villages flickered like distant stars, indifferent to my turmoil. I thought of our 7 years together, of all the effort I had poured into making Elias happy, into fitting into his family. I had tried tirelessly to be the partner he needed. But Freya and Liv had never accepted me. I saw it clearly now, the subtle, cutting ways they marked me as an outsider, as the one who had taken their brother. Family dinners were fraught with jokes I couldn't understand, inside stories that excluded me. Weekend trips passed without a single invitation. Elias had always reassured me, "They're just protective. They'll warm up to you." But they never had. Slowly, I began to see the patterns I had ignored. The constant messaging with his sisters even when we were together, the last-minute cancellations under the pretext that Freya needed help with something, or Liv was in some emotional crisis. Last year, he forgot our anniversary because Liv was preparing for an art exhibition. The year before, he missed my birthday because Freya had fought with her boyfriend. "Family comes first," he always said, and I had honored that. Yet, hadn't I earned a place in his family too? The bus curved along narrow mountain roads, winding through forests that seemed to close in around me. I hunched forward, phone clutched, hoping, almost desperately, for a message, an apology, a flicker of regret. But there was nothing. Only the cold, impersonal silence of the digital void, mirrored by the vast, indifferent landscape outside. With each passing mile, the situation crystallized in my mind. This wasn't about teaching me independence, as Elias and his sisters had claimed. It wasn't a quirky little adventure, a chance for me to find myself in some romanticized sense. No, this was humiliation dressed as education, a clear statement of my standing in their world. They wanted me to feel my place, small, powerless, replaceable. They wanted me to understand that my role was always secondary, never central, and certainly never equal. Anger bubbled alongside the shock, a bitter, fiery taste at the back of my throat. I had loved him. I had trusted him. And yet, here I was, alone in the cold, my dignity tossed aside like some unwanted luggage. The mountains watched silently as I sat, heart pounding, realizing that for years I had been ignoring the subtle cues, the small betrayals that now screamed at me with brutal clarity. I thought back to the quiet evenings, to the gentle way Elias had once brushed hair from my forehead, to the warmth of our apartment filled with sketches and laughter. And now those memories felt like taunting ghosts, mocking me with what could have been. I wrapped my coat tighter around myself, feeling the weight of solitude pressing down, but beneath the despair, a spark of resolve began to grow. This was their way of teaching me a lesson. They were mistaken. I was scared, yes, but I would not crumble under their orchestrated humiliation. I would navigate this, endure this, and find a way to reclaim my sense of self. The bus rattled on through the twisting roads, carrying me toward Oslo, but also, in a way, carrying me toward an awakening I had long postponed. For the first time in years, I truly saw the dynamics around me, the favoritism, the exclusions, the subtle manipulations. And in that quiet, lonely ride through the dark Norwegian mountains, I understood something essential. This was not just a lesson about independence. It was a reckoning. They had exposed the truth of my place in their world, but it was a truth I would confront, understand, and ultimately rise above. I remembered a small but piercing detail from the week before. While we were packing for the trip, Freya had insisted almost cheerfully that I shouldn't bring too much. "We'll all be together," she said, smiling as if she were doing me a kindness. Now, as the memory replayed in my mind, the meaning behind her words landed like a stone in my chest. She hadn't been trying to save me space. She had been preparing me for abandonment. By the time I reached Oslo at dawn, the city was still quiet, bathed in a pale blue light that clung to the edges of the buildings. The streets felt eerily empty, as though even the city itself knew I was arriving in pieces. I unlocked the door to our apartment and stepped inside. The air was cold and stale, heavy with the scent of coffee grounds and dust. The Volvo wasn't parked outside, and inside everything felt hollow, like a stage after a performance had ended. The silence pressed against my ears, a cruel reminder of how completely I had failed to see what was coming. I sank down at the kitchen table, my fingers trembling as I reached for Elias's laptop. He always left it open, never bothering with passwords, an unspoken signal of trust, or perhaps arrogance. I wasn't searching for dirt, not really. I just wanted to understand, to grasp what had happened to my life in the span of a single day. But as the screen lit up and my eyes scanned the messages, my heart began to splinter. There it was, a group chat between Elias, Freya, and Liv stretching back months. Message after message documented their plan, their casual cruelty, their jokes at my expense. Freya wrote, "Let Jenith find her own way back. She's always clinging to Elias. So pathetic." Liv responded, "Haha, bet she'll be crying to her mom right away." And then Elias, my husband, my supposed partner, typed, "This will be fun. She needs to learn to stand on her own." I stared at the screen, my breath shallow. My hands were cold, but not from the autumn air anymore. It was as if the blood inside me had frozen. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't some spontaneous prank gone wrong. They had planned to humiliate me, to laugh about my pain, to turn my dignity into their entertainment. Scrolling further, I found photos they had taken of me asleep on the sofa, captioned, "Clueless as always." Another of me at my drafting table, absorbed in a design with Freya's comment, "She's always buried in work, never notices Elias." Each image felt like a dagger, a record of how they saw me, not as a person but as a caricature. I closed the laptop with a quiet click, but the noise inside me roared. Tears blurred my vision, hot and unstoppable, but beneath them, something else ignited. A fire, small but fierce, sparking in the hollow space where my trust had been. This was the moment of breaking, but also the beginning of something I didn't yet have a name for. I couldn't live like this any longer. Not as a ghost in my own marriage, not as a punchline in their private jokes. Moving on autopilot, I pulled my suitcase from the closet and began to pack. Clothes, sketches, my laptop, my favorite pencils, only the essentials. I didn't leave a note. I didn't lock the door or switch off the lights. I simply walked out the way they had walked out on me. But unlike them, I knew I wouldn't come back. The drive to Bergen felt like shedding a skin. The roads unwound ahead of me, gray ribbons cutting through forests and fjords, and with each passing kilometer, the apartment behind me shrank in my mind. I had no plan, no certainty, but I had movement. And for the first time in years, I felt a strange kind of agency. Astrid opened the door before I even rang the bell. My older sister, 36, sharp-eyed, a freelance journalist who had built a life on chasing truths others wanted hidden, stood framed in the warm glow of her hallway. She had never liked Elias. From the very beginning, she had warned me. He leans too heavily on his sisters. You'll always come second. I had dismissed it as overprotectiveness, believing she just wanted to keep me safe. Now her words echoed in my mind like prophecy. When she saw me standing there with a single suitcase and eyes swollen from crying, she didn't ask questions. She simply pulled me into an embrace, her arms firm and steady around me, then led me inside and handed me a steaming mug of tea. The scent of chamomile wrapped around me like a blanket, and for the first time since the gas station, I exhaled fully. "How long are you staying?" she asked softly, her voice a blend of concern and quiet resolve. "I don't know," I said, my voice shaking but clearer than it had been in days. And then, like a dam breaking, I told her everything. The gas station, the messages, the betrayal that had unfolded like a cruel stage play. She listened without interrupting, her expression tightening but never turning away. When I finished, she shook her head slowly, her eyes dark with anger. "Jenith," she said, her voice low but firm, "you deserve better than this. So much better." Her words landed gently, but inside me they reverberated like a promise. For the first time in a long time, I began to believe her. On Monday, I called my company and requested a transfer to the Bergen branch. By a stroke of luck, they were just looking for someone to take on a new hotel design project. Felt like a lifeline, a chance to start again under the gentle light that bathed Norway's narrow fjords, far away from the painful memories embedded in Oslo. I immersed myself in work, the hum of drafting tables and the smell of freshly printed blueprints a balm to my frayed nerves. Slowly, I began to remember what it felt like to be me again, not just a shadow attached to someone else, but an architect with vision, purpose, and space to breathe. A few days later, Elias began calling. His voicemail was a mix of confusion and disbelief. "Jenith, where are you? Why did you leave like this? We need to talk." No apology, no acknowledgement of the betrayal, just shock that I had dared to walk away. I blocked his number and then Freya's and Liv's. But they wouldn't relent. Using unknown numbers, they sent messages telling me I was overreacting, that it was just a joke, and that I needed to grow up. A week later, Astrid told me Elias had shown up at her door, demanding to see me. My heart sank, heavy and brittle, as I stepped into the hallway of her apartment building to meet him. His expression was a mix of concern and faux innocence. "Jenith, I'm worried about you," he said, reaching toward my hand. I stepped back sharply, my voice firm despite the tremor beneath it. "Worried? You left me stranded on the highway, Elias. You and your sisters planned to humiliate me," I said, each word tasting like bitter ash. His face twisted, disbelief mingling with irritation. "It was just a joke." "You're too sensitive," he insisted, as though I were exaggerating, as though my heartache was merely a theatrical performance. I looked at him, the man I had once loved, trusted, and shared my life with, and realized I no longer knew who he was. "I'm not going back," I said, turning toward the elevator, ignoring his desperate calls as I walked away. Months passed. I found a small apartment in Bergen, close to the water, where the scent of the sea mingled with the fresh pine from nearby hills. Here I began to rebuild, not just the architectural designs that had always defined my work, but the dreams I had tucked away for years. I enrolled in a course on sustainable architecture, a path I had longed to pursue but Elias had dismissed as impractical. The first time I sketched a concept for an eco-friendly hotel terrace overlooking a fjord, I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't known in years, a quiet exhale that whispered, "This is yours, Jenith." Then one day, Astrid called. "Elias has been at Mom's," she said, voice tight with irritation. "He's telling her you're in crisis, that you left without reason." I sighed, the weight of his manipulation pressing down again. He still tried to control the narrative, to paint me as unstable, as if the shame of his actions could be transferred onto me. I told Astrid about the group chat, about the months of planning, about every cruel message and shared photo that had been a mockery of my life. She nodded, unwavering. "Don't let them define you, Jenith," she said, and I clung to those words like a lifeline. Determined to protect myself, I sought legal advice and met with Ingrid Larson, a sharp and efficient divorce lawyer. Ingrid wasted no time. "We'll need evidence of harassment," she said firmly. I handed over the messages from unknown numbers, the missed calls, the recordings of Elias's attempts to manipulate the story with my family. I told her about his appearance at my mother's house, the way he tried to twist facts to his favor. "We can use this," Ingrid said, a cold smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Norway allows no-fault divorce, but their behavior can help you protect your assets and ensure the court sees the full picture." Her words carried a mixture of reassurance and resolve, and for the first time in weeks, I felt I had an ally, a professional who would fight for me with clarity and purpose. While waiting for the proceedings to begin, a new piece of evidence arrived unexpectedly from Nora, a mutual friend and graphic designer. She sent me screenshots from Freya's Instagram, posted on the very night they abandoned me. The images were unmistakable, all three of them raising glasses in a bar in Galo, faces radiant with laughter, captions mocking my absence. "Finally free!" In one photo, Liv wore my knitted hat, the one I had forgotten in Elias's car. My stomach churned, but I sent the screenshots to Ingrid without hesitation. She glanced at them, a thin smile on her lips, sharp and calculated. "They've shot themselves in the foot," she said simply. The divorce proceedings were scheduled on a cold March morning. Snow drifted lazily across Bergen, coating the streets in white, the fjords reflecting the pale light of a low-hanging sun. I sat in the waiting room of the courthouse, a folder of evidence in my hands, my heart a mixture of nervous anticipation and quiet determination. each piece of paper, each screenshot, each message was a brick in the wall I was building to protect myself, to assert my worth, to finally declare that I would no longer be subject to the whims of those who had treated me as insignificant. When the judge entered, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath, the faint smell of old wood and paper filling the air. Elias was present, eyes shifting nervously, flanked by his sisters. The evidence was laid bare, each message and photo a testament to months of orchestrated humiliation and manipulation. For the first time, I felt no shame. Only clarity. Only power. Court listened, and for the first time, the weight of their betrayal was met with acknowledgement and consequence. Outside the courthouse, the cold March wind stung my cheeks, but I breathed deeply, savoring the moment. I had stepped away from a life defined by control, cruelty, and exclusion, and had begun constructing a future that was mine alone. The fjords glistened in the morning sun, serene and unyielding, and I realized that freedom was not a distant dream. It was something I could claim for myself, one deliberate step at a time. I slipped into a sleek, tailored suit and walked into the courthouse alongside Ingrid. The air was tense, crisp with anticipation. Elias sat across the room, looking haggard, attempting a smile that faltered the moment our eyes met. His confidence had vanished. The illusion of control he once wielded so effortlessly seemed to crumble under the weight of truth. His lawyer opened with rehearsed arguments, claiming I had abandoned him, that I refused to seek reconciliation. But Ingrid was ready. Every message, every Instagram post, every piece of evidence documenting harassment and humiliation had been meticulously organized. "This is not a harmless joke," Ingrid declared before the judge. "This was a deliberate plan to humiliate my client." She presented screenshots of the cruel group chat, photos taken without my knowledge, and the social media posts mocking my absence. Courtroom fell silent. Even Elias shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The judge nodded, acknowledging the evidence. Our marriage was over, assets were divided fairly, and no alimony was required. Justice, measured and clear, had been served. After the hearing, Elias attempted to approach me, but Ingrid intercepted him. "No contact," she said sharply. I stepped out into the crisp Bergen morning, feeling the weight of years of fear and doubt lift from my shoulders. It was as if I had finally exhaled, free to walk my own path without apology or interference. 3 years later, I had rebuilt my life from the ground up. I founded a small interior design firm in Bergen, specializing in eco-friendly spaces. Astrid became my partner in more ways than one, supporting me with her writing and helping our brand gain recognition. I purchased a modest house by the sea, where the mornings are filled with the soft rhythm of waves and the scent of salt in the air. No longer were my days dictated by someone else's whims. No more nights spent waiting for Elias to return from some emergency involving his sisters. I had created a life I could claim fully without compromise. But one day, Nora sent me a message. Elias remarried, but it lasted only a year. I learned that Freya had been fired for her role in a media scandal, and Liv lost the support of friends once the truth emerged. I didn't feel triumph or glee. Instead, a calm sense of relief settled over me. I had reclaimed my life, my dignity, my purpose. That, I realized, was the greatest victory. Reflecting on everything, 3 lessons became clear. First, never compromise your self-worth for someone else's approval. Second, trust your instincts. Your intuition often sees what others want to hide. And third, freedom and growth come from setting boundaries and walking away from toxicity, no matter how painful it may seem. If my story resonates with you, remember to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Life is too short to live in shadows. Reclaim your power, honor your worth, and never let anyone define your path. Every step you take toward independence is a step toward the life you were always meant to live.